Deborah Brooks. I'm the Policy and Personnel Committee Chairperson. I think we might just need a couple of minutes to let the participants come in, given that I just started the webinar. So just 30 seconds for participants to be able to join. Okay, we do have some attendees, so that's good. That means we're rolling. Okay, great. Dr. Shields, without further ado, let's head into this morning's agenda.
All right. Very well, and good morning, everyone. I will start off with the contents of the packet, and we will start with the fact that we have our minutes here from our April 6th meeting as a reference point for everyone, if they're needed. And I'll roll right into the personnel update. We have a search going on in our high school for the assistant principal vacancy that we have due to Dr. Fitzgerald's retirement. So we have some finalists being screened. I'm happy to share with this committee that our future high school principal, Dr. Baer, will be part of that screening process for those finalists as well. But Mr. Lewis is leading that search, but we'll be consulting with her along the way. We're also in the process of hiring teacher vacancies that are a result of either resignations or a result of our retirements. We received approximately 13 retirements during this school year, so we're in the process of filling those as well. You'll see appointments on the June 7th Board of Education agenda for those people that we have finalized in that process. And we hope to have the assistant principal on that agenda as well, because that position starts on July 1st. Ms. Brooks, may I move on to the first policy, 1.3?
Yes, I just wanted to add that this morning with what used to be Coffee with Pernick, but it's now Coffee with Lewis, Dr. Baer is actually a guest at the coffee. So Schreiber parents are able to, quote unquote, meet with her this morning to get an introduction. So she's, and I know that she wants to begin integrating herself into Schreiber life as much as she can. So I just wanted to add that here.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Mr. Lewis has been working very closely with her, making sure she's aware of events that are going on throughout the closing 2 months of our school year. For example, I think we all saw her at the tenure reception at the last board meeting, which was very nice of her to, give us that time to join us here in our community.
Yes, I just wanted to let people know who are listening that, she's on her way in, truly, truly. Okay, so yes, item 1.3, grading, please.
Yes, policy 4710, for those people who are watching who are maybe new to this committee process, this is a new policy that has been worked on by this committee. It's also been up for a first reading on a board agenda in the public domain. And there were some edits that were requested from that first reading. The attached policy that you see of 4710, those edits are in bold. You'll see them in the middle of paragraph 2. You'll also see them in the closing paragraph as well. Those edits were brought back to administrators and teacher leaders here in our community. They are fine with those edits as well. So I bring them back here to this committee to let you know that they've been through the approval process. And with your permission, we would put it on for the adoption of this new policy at the June 7th board meeting.
Any comments, questions? No, we're good. Okay, I'm thrilled to hear it. Yay. Thank you very much to the teacher leadership and the administrators. Let's go with it. Okay, so I don't know if we'll see it on, well, May 17th is a board meeting, but not really.
No, June 7th. May 17th is only budget.
Right, so I just wanted to be sure. I just wanted to be sure I didn't misspeak and jump ahead of things. So
Dr. Shields said June 7th.
Just wanted to be sure that there's no possibility of that. I just wanted to really get this on. So just didn't hurt to ask, right? Okay, we'll see it in June. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So the next item on the agenda is just an update for this committee. Homework has some revisions to it. Those revisions were put in place, and the homework policy was brought to the board for a first reading at the last board meeting. There were some additional comments made by some members of the board. So Ms. Brooks worked out those edits, and she's returned that policy now to central office. We're in the process of working with teacher and administrator leaders to have those edits reviewed. Our goal is to have that back on the June 7th agenda. But Ms. Brooks, I will share if there's any feedback from the administrators or teachers. I will share that with you, of course, prior to that going on a public agenda. That is in the works. You sent us those edits, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. And I just want the public to know that the edits I sent were based on the comments that were made in public at the Board of Ed meeting. So there was, that's what was added. It wasn't anything substantively new that wasn't discussed at the Board of Ed meeting. So thank you for that. Dr. Block?
Can we just talk about timing? So like, we're not approving any policy today in committee. So what does that mean for timing of getting the homework policy approved, ready for the fall?
So Adam, if I understand what Dr. Shields said, if the edits that were taken and made to the homework policy, because it was up for a first reading at the last meeting, right? And there were comments and edits that were requested by a board member, actually. So it's now gone back to the administration. So Deborah took the comments, incorporated it in the policy, and now the teachers are looking at it. Theoretically, if the teachers are okay with the comments or changes that were made per the policy, we could have this policy up for adoption on June 7th. And the entire committee can actually, so we don't necessarily need to bring it back to committee. I know that's one of
Okay, that's my question.
If in fact, and that's what I think Dr. Shields said, is that he was hoping to get it on June 7th. So on June 7th, we would all look at it as a board of 7, and then we could vote on it as a board of 7. Again, we need to have a majority for the policy. So even if there's one person, let's say hypothetically, who still has an issue with the way the policy is written, if 6 of us are okay with it or 4 of us are okay with it, then that's the policy. Okay, process-wise, so it's going to be on June 7th.
Thank you.
But I think you wanted to read something. No?
At whatever the appropriate time is, if it's now, if it is during community comments, because technically these are members of the community.
Okay,
My suggestion would be that you put it in, that you have it as community comments. That's my suggestion. That's the process.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Dr. Shields, item 1.5, please.
Yeah, so just closing my windows because the landscapers have arrived. So yes, item 1.5 is policy 1810, gifts to school personnel. This policy was discussed at a past committee meeting. It has now gotten back on our agenda here to continue to work on it. For those of you who may not recall, what we did was we merged the Port Washington policy with the NYSBA policy, NYSBA sample policy. And that is the draft that you have. The question was posed, and I was asked to go back to Mr. Miller, our attorney, and confirm whether the $75 value is still relevant. And Mr. Miller has confirmed that that is still the number that we need to work with. And that's why you see that in the draft of the policy that you have before you now. So this that you see in italics is represents the new draft for consideration for the committee.
Any questions or comments before I make mine? Okay, so minuscule. So thank you for coming back with that. I think we found the statute last time, and we saw on the statute that it was still $75, and this is statutory. And there's a reference to the statute at the bottom of the policy. In the second paragraph, we have again his, her duties, and we agreed at the beginning of the year that we were going to go with the gender neutral language of their. So if we could just, and that's minute, it doesn't have to come back to committee for that. Also, there should be a cross-reference of our school officer and employee code of ethics, and I believe that's policy 2160.1, I think. And it's called school officers and employee ethics. If you wanted to double check just to make sure, that should be there as a cross-reference. And we added the sentence, the very first sentence about the presentation of gifts shall not be an encouraged practice, because we don't want parents or students to feel obligated. And we had a discussion the last time we were here about whether that sentence where we said shall not be an encouraged practice, how that comports with HSAs giving gifts, or HSA class parents collecting money for holiday gifts. And we left off there, and I don't know that the committee, I don't know where the committee landed, because we left off. And I think there was an intent where Dr. Hines was going to go back to the HSAs. Somewhere there was going to be a communication with parent representatives to see whether this opening sentence constricted them in a way that we didn't mean to constrict them, but also we don't want parents to feel obligated when a class parent asks for money or an HSA asks for money. So where are we?
So, well, good morning, everyone. I'm meeting with all the HSA presidents this Friday morning. So I can report back after that. So I have no further information until I meet with all of them. I could have just met with Parents Council, but I wanted to meet with all the presidents at the same time. So once I have that information, I can share it with you, Devin and Chris, and then we can move forward.
Okay. Any committee members have any comments about that? Everybody remember the conversation? I just want to make sure that I accurately portray the conversation. And okay, good.
Sorry, Deb, just a real quick question. Is this a concern? I'm just wondering, from a magnitude perspective, is this something that we're really concerned about? Have we heard of anything like that has been happening that maybe shouldn't, that has exceeded $75? I'm just wondering, if there's anything that you or others may have heard. For whatever it's worth, I haven't, but I know this is, something that needs to be put in place. I'm just thinking from a policing perspective too, probably the wrong word, but how do we go about monitoring if something is $75 or less? So we need to really think about what that entails.
I agree. And and also, so you make me realize that if class parents are collecting money for a gift, class parents, and the HSAs need to understand, even if you were to collect $5 from every child, if you have a class of 20 kids, that's $100. So already that's violating the policy. I'm trying to think if we need to, the issue of talking to the HSAs was not so much about the $75, because they can always be told about that later, but whether they should be asking for money at all from classroom parents for end of year gifts. I think that was really the overarching, even if they ask for $1,
sure,
or $1.50 or whatever it is, because it seems to be a routine practice, unless things have changed. It seems to be more of a routine practice, almost, and because it's routine, it could almost seem like an expectation, where it's clearly not. Parents have never been forced to contribute. It's always been discretionary, but sometimes it feels like you have to, because that's become the norm, if that makes sense. So just trying to figure out a way to word this so that if class parents feel that they want to collect it in a way that never makes any parent feel obligated, even though I know that's what it's saying, but I don't want the policy to prevent gifts from being given, but I also want the policy to be clear that there's never an obligation.
I'm sorry, I stepped away. Which are we still on 1810?
Yes.
Yes, okay, sorry, I'll be quiet now. I just
No,
got
it's
back.
okay.
And I just wanted to know what policy we were still
Yeah, it's
talking.
okay. So that's really the concern, that tension between having a policy where no parent should ever feel obligated or student should ever feel obligated, but also not constraining class parents or HSAs from being able to reach out. So that's the concern.
So I think the way the policy is written though is helps in that way. No, Deborah? I mean, you're saying to make more changes to the way the policy is written?
Where it says shall not be, well, that's the question. Does the opening sentence properly convey that no parent should ever feel
Yes, I think that's
obligated?
the opening sentence. It says shall not be encouraged.
Shall not be encouraged.
Shall not be I think this policy, I mean, I think we should just start moving these policies into action already. We've talked about this policy for a while. We made changes to it because NYSBA updated it. We checked the pricing. I think, I don't think there's an issue, I think. So I think it makes the point that you're saying.
Okay, but there was an action step involved that hasn't happened yet. So that's why I raised it. I didn't want to move forward without reminding Dr. Hines that he had offered to speak with the HSA presidents. So, Dr. Hines, you're under no obligation.
First reading.
I'm sorry?
My suggestion is we move things along and put it up for first reading. But
Dr. Hines, how do you feel about the first paragraph? And what is your comfort level? I will defer to you on that.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the first paragraph, and I'm comfortable moving it to first reading. I think, for me, just getting a general sense of what the request was from the committee, I think will assist. But I think this is okay, the way it is. I really do. Thanks.
Okay. Any comments from the committee? Okay, hearing none, then we will move this to first read. Okay, next on the agenda.
Yes, next on the agenda, 1.6 policy 1800 gifts for the public. We've not had a prior discussion on this, but it has been on prior agendas. We just not reached it in our work. So Ms. Brooks, I turn it over to you for 1800.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to be sure that the additions, the corrections will be on 1810 when it goes on for a first read, and I'll double check in board docs. The changing of his, her to there, and the addition of the 2160.1 policy as a cross-reference.
Yes, that's confirmed. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so gifts from the public, our policy was last reviewed in 1991, or so it says. NYSBA has a template that is rather new, that I think is great. I think it needs a little bit of cleaning up. So I have my comments, but I will of course defer to the members of the committee if they have any comments first. Dr. Block or Ms. Melkonian? Ms. Melkonian?
Thank you. So, forgive my hoarse voice. Let's start with that. And good morning. So the policy to me is a conversation about equity. So it's a broader, more philosophical conversation for me than the actual meat and potatoes of.
Excuse me, Nan. When you're moving your papers over the microphone, we're hearing the papers, but not your voice.
I'm so sorry. Do you need me to repeat?
If you could, please.
Okay. This policy conversation for me is more global and philosophical. in terms of equity and how we participate with the community and their generosity to our schools, but how that is broadly shared in terms of the community's ability to share their fundraising, et cetera, or their generosity. So this is a really big conversation that to me has broad implications that are not about the meat and potatoes or the language in any of these policies. So for me, I think that's where I'd like to start.
So can I make a suggestion? Because I agree, what Nanette is pointing out is a bigger conversation more than so the policy. So Nanette, I'm 100% with you on this. So may I suggest that in light of the fact that this is kind of like the wrap up part of the year, that we move this policy to a September on Board of Education meeting, because I think before we can really create a policy, I think the Board of Education should have a discussion on where they all stand philosophically on donations. And I think this is what Nana has brought up. So before we make changes to a policy, my suggestion is that we take it to and make it a discussion item at a future board meeting, where we actually talk about what we believe, where we stand equity wise. I mean, I think we have a bigger discussion and it shouldn't be a policy. So my suggestion is that we move this to a discussion item at a board meeting, and my suggestion is to do it, at the beginning of the school year going forward. That's my suggestion.
One of our recurring themes also for as long as I've been on the board is equity. And it's part of our vision and mission, and it's the umbrella over everything. It's whole child. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I think we already have that vision, and that's part of why Nan is bringing this up.
I understand, but we have not had a discussion as a Board of Education on whether or not we're accepting gifts from the public. And that is the equity is one thing. The conversation about whether or not this policy is talking about gifts that we accept, which is basically what the HSAs do for the school district every single day. At every single board meeting, we as a board accept donations so I think there's a bigger discussion, and I think before there's any changes that are made or potential changes, this has to be a consensus agreement from the Board of Education that we will continue to accept them, not accept them, or make them limited to a certain amount, spread them evenly against all schools. I mean, we've accepted donations that go primarily to one school, maybe not. So again, that is the philosophical, sorry, I have my gardeners now, the philosophical question that I believe belongs at the Board of Education level.
Dr. Hines, what is your feeling? Because we've always thought that recommendations should come out of the committee level on a policy issue. And this is a philosophy and a policy, much as the grading, the homework. Dr. Hines?
So I understand where Emily's coming from. The last thing I want to do is be in the middle of whether this should or shouldn't take place. It is an important conversation. I think there are a lot of different edges to it, as Emily said before. I mean, I guess my question would be, what are we looking to change? Like, what are we looking to, because you're right. I mean, 91, my gosh, it's been a very long time since this has even been looked at. So I think a conversation, I think is not a bad thing, but I think for us to consider, moving anything to a first reading right or soon, I think it involves a lot more conversation. But I think for us to just look at it right now, I don't see the negative impact of that. But I think for us to really consider what Emily's saying, the big picture aspect of this, because again, not to be redundant, but it has a lot of different edges. to this. So I just want us to be mindful of that.
Committee members?
Dr. Black?
Sure. Yeah, I tend to think that, so I'm on the fence on this, which is that this is a broader, philosophical issue, and the broader philosophical issue will drive the policy. However, to me, like, this is what the policy committee is for, is to discuss these issues. So I tend to think that it is appropriate to have a discussion now. Because if not now, when? I mean, we don't have a packed agenda today. We have time to do it, and this is a way to start the conversation.
Okay, so Nan, you raised this. So my thinking is that we have a recommendation here, and we try to move this in a way, because there are other things within the policy that really need to be cleaned up, and that we get this on the track. I think we, as a board, we have discussed many times equity with playgrounds, with facilities, with ventilation, with everything. I understand the tension with the HSAs, and I'm wondering also how the HSAs would approach this. Now I'm really thinking outside the box.
So this is why, Deborah, I would have thought that you would have had the HSA as part of this conversation. And we've done this in the past in policy meetings where we've invited members of the community to make sure that they're part of a conversation that does affect them. Rachel does have her hand up, so I just want to point that out. Rachel is on this call and she wanted to give input. Look, the policy can be discussed. Definitely, we're spending time talking about it, so we might as well talk about what changes we want to make anyway. I'm just saying that when it does come to first reading, it is going to be one where we have a discussion at the board level. So, I'm just saying, what comes first, right? The chicken or the egg type of situation. And I think this is what Adam Block was saying. So go right ahead and have what changes you want to make. But Nanette started the conversation by saying this is more a philosophical discussion. Philosophical discussions don't happen at the committee level. Philosophical discussions happen at the broad board level. Once you have a philosophy at the board level, then you bring it down to the policies. So that's just what I'm pointing out. But I'm giving you my input. It doesn't make a difference. We're going to wind up discussing it when it comes to the board level, no matter what, whether it's at first reading or before first reading. And so Rachel has her hand up. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Okay, Rachel, I'm going to go ahead. Do you need to be unmuted, Rachel? Can you unmute yourself?
No, I'm good. So I guess I don't even understand why the objection would be there for having this discussion now. I mean, I agree with Deborah. We've had this philosophical conversation at the board level. Equity is something we've talked about a lot. We do care about it. It's not like Nan is coming out of left field with this equity concern. I've even taken part in discussions at the board and the policy and other committee level about equity over the last 5 years. It's like a normal thing to raise. And I think that sometimes there seem to be objections that come from some corners of the board about whether something is the appropriate place to have a conversation or whether we can even have a conversation to begin with. And it just feels like a waste of time to me. Like, this is the policy committee. This is the structure we have in place. If there is a policy that needs to be reviewed, this one hasn't been reviewed since 1991. It starts at the policy committee. Everything that comes out of the policy committee is reviewed by the entire board, and the board has time to have input for it. And the committee itself can decide not even to send it to first read, but to send it to the overall board to discuss further. But this one seems very non-controversial to me. The policy needs to be updated. We do care about donations. We do care about equity. Equity gets raised as part of it. It's no big deal. I would just continue the conversation because it's not like this committee is going to make a decision for the rest of the board anyway, without it coming to the rest of the board.
Nan?
I'm also thinking that it might be good timing to begin this today, especially if Dr. Hines is meeting with all of the HSA co-presidents and Perhaps he can debrief them on the conversation that takes place here and ask for their feedback, and they can do their work. And then by the time we're around for our next meeting on this, perhaps Dr. Hines has feedback from Parents Council. So I think it might be a good beginning at a good time.
So Deb, why don't you go ahead and talk about what changes you want to make to the policy?
So let's look at this policy with the lens toward
Mhm.
equity. And that should be in everything we do. We're always trying to achieve that anyway, as we rightfully should. So looking at it with the lens toward equity, let's go through. I don't want to make my changes, my comments until I've let the committee speak. So Ms. Melkonian, you were in the middle of something. You mentioned about equity. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add into the policy in terms of language, or if you had other comments.
Well, what does equity mean regarding this policy, I guess is my question. What does it mean?
To me, I can answer to me, or I don't know.
No,
if
I'm
you-
just talking that's what I think we need to figure out. What is equity? What is that? Does that mean everything is spread out equally? Like, that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, I don't understand. That's what we need to define.
I understand. So I know what I think. I know what I have said in prior meetings as just a regular parent before I was on the board discussing this. That's before 2019 and recently. But Ms. Melkonian, if you want to speak first because you brought it up, I'll let you go first, or I can carry on.
As I said, I don't have substantive thoughts on the actual language or the meat and potatoes of this. It's more of a, not just philosophical, but operationally, how do we operationalize the equity of this conversation while respecting and being grateful for families that are thrilled to, make donations to our schools and to our program. So I think it's more of a problem-solving conversation for me than a language conversation. I'm sorry if I'm not contributing the way that beyond that.
Okay, so my feeling is that this fundraising throughout the district should always be done with a lens toward equity. That if there is a school where parents either are more generous or have more with which to be generous, that a school that doesn't have that parent body, because it is the parent body that is contributing, should not feel like the lesser child.
Deb, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just keep this in mind when you're thinking about all of this. We are not discussing just parents. We have the Ed Foundation, we have Hearts, we have the Vikings Foundation, the Jana Foundation. There have been many contributors, right? So just keep that in mind. It's not just about the parents, it's about all the organizations that contribute to our schools. So
Okay.
and this, so I'm just saying, because I know you're thinking and you're brainstorming, so I'm just trying to say that we should think that it's not just parents.
Point well taken. So in any event, from whatever the source, and this really, we're talking about the elementary schools, that no elementary school as an entity, as a personalized entity, should feel left out or feel like the lesser child. There shouldn't one school shouldn't constantly be struggling with playground equipment, or when my daughter was in elementary school, the smart boards. This school had all the smart boards and this school didn't have any, struggling to find money for smart boards, that type of thing, because the learning experiences and the play experiences of all of the children should be, we've always talked about parity among the elementary schools, parity within the houses at Weber, it's parity within the sections at Schreiber. It should always be viewed toward that lens. And that parity sometimes comes from curriculum, sometimes comes from money, how the money gets allocated. So I would just like to start with the philosophy. I'm not sure how we execute it. That's the conversation to have. that the policy should operate with a lens toward equity. I think we just need to put that in there somewhere to remind us that we may have to think very seriously about how we operate as a community with so many elementary schools, and really disparities amongst them in terms of equipment and so forth, and reorient the community to what it means to truly have equity in our school district. And I think that can start here as a policy based on our board goals and mission and vision, which, you know, we've gone over ad nauseum for the past year or so. So having said that, and being able to move forward with you know, how it gets operationalized is really up to the superintendent and administration. But as a policy matter, let's start with that overarching theme and just put it into this policy, that this policy should operate with a lens toward equity throughout the district. And then we can move on to the other changes and get into the other substance of the policy. So if no one has any, Ms. Malconian?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, perhaps Dr. Shields or Dr. Hines, in terms of best practice, do you know of how this is handled outside of our district? How has this been tackled by somebody well before? Are we recreating the wheel? I know we have NISBA, but
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. I'm not very familiar with how other districts are doing this. So let's take it for instance. Let's just maybe take an example or an exemplar of what has happened here in the past, and then what we're thinking potentially how the policy would impact that. We have families at Daly. It sounds like few families at Daly that have really dedicated a decent amount of money toward things at Daly. So let's just say that the amount is $10,000, $15,000, and they wanted something specifically for Daly. What would this policy say to something like that? Because I think that's the crux of what we're talking about, right? And I think, and again, that's why there's a lot of different edges to this, because my inclination, I could be wrong. I think you'll have families that won't want to donate if it's not going specifically toward what they would like to see. So, you know, is it going to a large pot and then we figure out how to distribute that money, you know, from an equity standpoint, a parity standpoint? So that's an example. So what would that look like and sound like? I guess is my question.
I understand that, but ideally we fund our schools through a state aid, pilot, tax dollars in an equitable way. Ideally, in an ideal world, in the world in which I grew up, private people didn't have to donate to schools. The schools were properly funded. This is where I'm going. Schools were properly funded. Donations, to me, are not a proper way to fund schools. It's a luxury. It's a reality, unfortunately, because of budget cuts and increased expenses. But as a school board, when we vote on the budget, we do things equitably. You know, if we have to have pain, we try to spread the pain.
Sure.
When we have extra money, we try to spread that wealth. So I understand the donations, and then maybe the families wouldn't donate. But as a policy matter, policy-wise, we want to strive for equity, and I think that it needs to be a shared value within the community. I know it's shared with Ed Foundation gives their grants. The teachers can apply for the grants. In that respect, there's a level playing
But
field.
Deb, I'm sorry, but what you just said basically means we don't have an Ed Foundation, or we don't have a Hearts, because if you're saying that schools should not be funded by donations, a Hearts and Ed Foundation exists for that purpose. I mean, they're funding supplemental programming that we are not funding through the taxpayers. So you did. So what I'm trying,
it's a luxury. It's a reality.
But
It's a reality I said, in an ideal world, in the right kind of world,
In an ideal world,
schools should
right,
be
we wouldn't have an,
comparable.
correct, we wouldn't
Right,
have an
that's-
ed foundation in an ideal world. So can we
Yes.
look at the NISBA policy? Because I think the NISBA policy has a little bit more of the updated language that maybe is more in line with what we're trying to achieve.
Right, so I was actually going to try to go in, and Nan asked her question, and I just wanted to give Dr. Hines a chance to answer the question, and then we kind of rolled from there. So some of the language that I actually wanted to mesh from the old policy with the new policy. So in the first paragraph, where it says the Board of Education welcomes and appreciates gifts and donations, I would then say of money, property, equipment, and materials. It's from the second line, from the public. And then I would go to the original policy that says, which from the first paragraph of the original policy that says, provided that it is made within the statutory authority granted to school districts and receives the approval of the Board of Education. I think that's an important step that needs to be in there. And it's really, that's just kind of procedural. I don't like the way this first paragraph was worded. And then we would say, then the superintendent of schools may accept on behalf of the board gifts and donations having a value less than, I don't know what the dollar amount is. Somebody has to provide that. Okay. And then on the next page of the policy, where it says the terms of the gifts must identify, I would just ask that those be bulleted for the subject of the gift, the purpose of the gift, the beneficiary, beneficiaries, etc.
Deb, I have input on that list right there if you want it.
I'm sorry?
I have input on that list that you just.
Oh, sure.
go through
Sure.
right there.
Yeah. Oh, no, I didn't realize, I thought you didn't have any other comments, but please go ahead.
No, I didn't realize we were going to go into the meat of it, but I'm seeing that in that list, number 5, I believe it is, the gift must not benefit a particular or named individual or individuals. So does that imply a school?
No, I think it's for people.
Okay.
I think it means for
Because
people.
individuals means if you say it's going to X elementary school, that's individuals.
I think it means people,
Okay.
that it can't go to an administrator or a teacher.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
Okay. And then on the third page, there's a paragraph that says, prior to seeking any grant or donation, the applicant must obtain prior approval from the district, so forth and so on. Teachers seeking grants for their classroom must obtain prior approval from the building principal. Can we review that paragraph to see if all that language is necessary? Must it, so for example, must an applicant obtain prior approval from the district before seeking a grant or donation? Do we want all this language? I'm just asking operationally. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think operationally, that's how we do it anyway,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And I think that's what's in our current policy also. It needs to get approved. And Deb, actually, further down in that thing, it's where you were talking about your equity statement. It's where it says all grants and donations must benefit the district and must be congruent with the following principles. I honestly think this is the meat of what we were trying to say, and it basically is the meat of, it should be the entire policy, right? If everything if it checks off all of these boxes, then it should be okay.
Mhm.
And it does talk about equity and
Equity
funding.
and funding. Yes.
Right.
Yes. But I still think we need an opening sentence that talks about the fact that this is viewed with the lens through equity. And because this is just a little bullet point that kind of gets lost in here. But it does say equity and funding. So NISBA is talking to Port Washington today. So in that list, excuse me. So I'm sorry. So back to the first paragraph. we would need a dollar threshold. It says grant applications for funding of more than X number of dollars require prior approval by the Board of Education. I don't know what that number should be. So if somebody could just, let the committee know if there is a number now. Sounds more like a regulation, but
I mean, I'm just trying to think of grants we've applied for outside, of course, the title grants, which we received, which is totally different. I can't think of a single one that exceeds $100,000, at least at the moment. I don't know, Chris, I don't know if anything comes to mind that would exceed that amount too.
No, nothing comes to mind.
So maybe we just leave the amount that NISBA put in there. Unless we don't need to. I don't even know if we need to.
does Title One, or excuse either Title One or Title Two, or any of those grants, because those are grants, would those fall into this category? Do you need to come to the board to get that type of approval?
I mean, we have it in the past, just the expenditure side of it we have, right? But not really, because we're not really I guess we are. We're applying, but it's an ongoing process where we're not actively doing it. We're not soliciting, let's say, like with the Ed Foundation grant, right? Like that I think that's totally different than the title funds we receive. So I would leave that separate and apart. But I don't even know if we need a number. I mean, unless you think we do.
I didn't actually think that the Title I, Deborah, you bring up a point, like Title I grants would fall under this policy. I think that,
I don't think so.
I thought grants too would be like Ed Foundation or Hearts or, Viking Foundation, those kind of grants that we've gotten. Because maybe we should actually put a line that says this does not apply to title funds.
Or I could ask NISBA if they envision, I can do that. I can certainly go back to NISBA and say, in fact, I will go back to NISBA. Let me just make a note for myself to reach out to NISBA.
This is Rachel. I'm sorry to cut in. I just put a suggestion in the chat.
Chat. Why would we put a number here unless we are required to? The superintendent of schools may accept on behalf of the board gifts and donations of any value not prohibited by law. That's good. I know I just read that quickly, but Javi, I can always go back and listen to myself to get that language. And we can ask Howard if Mr. Miller, if that's okay, because I think it's great. If it's not prohibited by law, then more power to you. Everybody okay with that suggestion? Yes, I see heads nodding. Good. Okay. So then when we go down a little further from that paragraph, under the sentence, it says all grants and donations must benefit the district and be congruent with the following principles. If we could please bullet those principles. It's just a little stylistic thing that helps my eyes adjust. On the next page where we have the heading coordinating with support organizations. And there's a note that NISBA has included this section to encourage prior coordination when raising funds for the district. So then the sentence, and we have to choose one, it says the district either encourages or requires independent support organizations. So Ed Foundations is listed as one of those, seeking to make a contribution of money or property to first meet with the superintendent to identify the terms and conditions of the proposed gift and the needs of the district. The board must approve such gifts and donations prior to any public announcement of the contribution. So this is a two-step process. First, they have to meet with the superintendent. Then the board has to approve such gifts and donations prior to any public announcement of the contribution. My sense is this is not currently being done. Operationally, do we want this to be done? So for example, does does the Viking Foundation have to,
So-
or any boost?
So I think with the announcement part of it is when we actually, so as part of our agenda that we approve consent, right? There's the donations after. So we then announce the donations, or sometimes it's actually the other way around. We announce them first and then we accept them. We could do it the other way around, but I don't know, like, we don't, that's the process. So I think the process, if you wanted to just talk about the announcing versus accepting, we could always first do consent and then say we just approved the following donations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay,
Yes.
that's just a change in process. That's not a big
Mhm.
change.
But
But
the whole sentence before that.
right, I mean, I don't, again, I guess these are all questions that you will bring up when you do your first reading.
Well, also, but I just want to know currently, before, let's say, the Viking Foundation or the Ed Foundation or DeJano, whoever has been so generous to the district, seeks to make a contribution, must they first meet with the superintendent,
do.
right, by the terms and conditions? This is what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is this the process that
So,
happens?
yeah, I can tell you that the Ed Foundation does, for sure. We sit down.
And Hearts meets with Kevin Scully. I mean, all the
That's right.
foundations, a Viking Foundation meets with Nick Stratweiser, gives their donations, and then they've informed the superintendent. So it should say superintendent or their designee.
I was
Okay,
just right.
because there, right? Because, you know, when there's a donation made from an HSA, it's not being met. They're not meeting with the superintendent. They're meeting with their building principal to say, you know, right? So it's superintendent or their designee.
Okay, so first they're meeting with the superintendent or the designee to identify the terms and conditions of the proposed gift, not the actual gift itself, but before they even get to the actual gift. So are we encouraging or are we requiring? This is a required step in order to have these donations come to fruition?
Yes.
Really? Dr. Hine?
I mean, it's definitely a practice. So why wouldn't we just say that they must, they shall,
Yeah.
use the word shall.
Well, here it says requires. We'll do requires.
Yeah.
Requires, very straightforward. Okay.
Agree.
Very great. Okay. Then under the accounting for and oversight of all donations, in the last paragraph on that page, it says the board shall receive a report, and it says insert frequency, e.g. annually, of all gifts, donations, grants, funds, property, and materials received by the district during the year and where each was used. So do we leave that up to Kathy, to Ms. O'Hara, sorry, to decide the best way for her to report to the board all the gifts, foundations, grants, etc., and where each was used? I think monthly would probably drive her crazy. Is it best annually done? I see head shaking, yes. Dr. Hines, is that okay with you and your staff? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I also think it's part of the audited process, if I remember correctly, right? We've gotten the audit reports where we talk about, you know, funds and stuff. So I think annually, maybe it's something that the audit committee is looking at annually.
Okay. And then my only remaining comments are under the cross-reference. So we instead of policy 1222, ours is policy 1221, which is, I think it's called Relations with Community and Parent Organizations. I would double check. We do not have a policy 1225. Maybe we should, but we don't currently. So that gets struck. We do not have a policy 2160. Ours instead is 2160.1, and then the corresponding title. We do not have a student fundraising activities. Oh, excuse me, we do. It's policy 5252 instead of 5251. I have to check that. I have a note here to check the title, but I can go through that with Javi. And then we don't have a policy for inventories, but we do have a policy 6800, which is accounting of fixed assets. And I don't know if that's an appropriate substitute policy for inventories. So we can always go back and noodle that figure out which would be the best way to account for. The only thing I could think of was the fixed assets. Ms. McConey, your hand is raised.
I was going to wait for you to be done. I just wanted to make one more comment. I don't want to interrupt you though. Are you done with that?
I finished. It was what I was doing was ministerials.
Okay, so I think a really important sentence that we didn't read in that entire document was the last sentence. And perhaps that is something that belongs at the beginning of this document rather than at the end, where it says, it is the goal of the board to properly account for all district resources and to monitor the distribution of those resources to minimize disparities between schools within the district.
So we can move that sentence and a little opening paragraph where we start with this policy shall operate with a lens toward equity throughout the district, period. It is the goal of the board to properly account for all district resources and to monitor the distribution of those resources to minimize disparities between schools within the district. That way we put it up front. You're shaking your head, yes, you like that. Okay, Dr. Block?
Yeah, I'm okay with the restructuring.
Okay, great. So we will move that sentence. This is a very surgical procedure here. We'll get it. Okay. Oh, and the title also has changed. So instead of gifts from the public, the NISBA title is now donations, gifts, and grants to the district. Which really lays out the extra money coming in. Okay. Any other comments, considerations? Okay, great. Thank you, everybody here for your input. That was a good collaborative effort. Dr. Shields. And we'll put that, we'll bring that back because there's a lot of, I feel like there's a lot of surgery that has to be done to that policy. So we'll bring it back just to make sure that.
So you're bringing this policy back to committee, right?
Yeah.
You're not bringing, okay.
No.
I just wrote it down. Perfect.
Yes, yes, yes. And yes, I said there's a lot of surgery that has to be done on this, so we're bringing it back. And okay, so now we're on to 1.7.
I'm sorry, can I just chime in one more time? I don't know if anyone cares. The last paragraph in our current 1991 policy.
Yes.
Does anyone want that language included anywhere? Do you want me to read it or do you want to read it yourselves?
I see it. It says, while a gift, I actually had a question mark next to it. While a gift may be presented to a particular building or department / program within a building, the school board reserves ultimate right to use the gift elsewhere as the total needs of the school system dictate. The first priority will be to honor the desire of the donor. I read that as being in total conflict with the equity issue. So I understand why you're raising that point. I had put a question mark there and then I decided not to say anything once we delved into the overarching policy of that this should be viewed with a lens toward equity. But as a policy matter.
I think we've always said that and this does actually talks to equity, right? Because if it is ultimately up to the Board of Education, if the Board of Education thinks that a particular school is getting, I mean, it's always been, you give a donation, but we could decide to bring it someplace else. So I don't know that, I think that line should stay in there is my overall.
Well, I'm wondering if the sentence, the first priority will be to honor the desire of the donor.
That should be the first priority, yes. I do think that. I mean, you want to honor the donor provided that it's within the equity aspect of it, right? I mean, there's a lot, that would be the last, first comes at our goal.
Okay, so why don't we do this? we have our first paragraph, our kind of new first paragraph. We can add this paragraph in after it, see how it reads. Let's see everything kind of mushed together as a first draft. So we can see it all in one document and really have a chance to look at it synthesized to see if we like how it feels synthesized in one place. And then we can continue the conversation in June. So then we would add the last paragraph from our ancient policy and basically make it part of the new first paragraph. And Javi, I promise I will look over this in board docs with you, and I'll help you get this right, because I know there's a lot of back and forth. So is that okay? That way we mesh it, we sit with it, we percolate it, and we'll see how it feels when we bring it back. Okay, good. Okay, so we're back to public participation.
Yes, item 1.7, public participation in a board meeting. That's policy 2370 that we currently have. There was some discussion around whether we want to add any more detail to this policy or leave it as is. It was last revised in 2020.
Okay, so I had to go back to the video replay for this one. We began discussing this policy in February 20, this past February, because NISBA updated the policy in October of 21. And I felt it was important because it really fleshed it out. I felt it was important to bring it back before the committee. So we had already discussed the fact that we were going to change the title of the policy to public attendance / comment at board meetings, and change the policy number to have it align with NISBA's number. So the new policy number would be 1230. This is what we discussed back in February. And that's basically as far as we got. We got to the first page. We had started going to the second page when we stopped. So we left off at the paragraph where the Board of Education encourages public comment and so forth and so on. The NISBA policy, and this really happened because of, there was a lot of public participation during the pandemic, and the public comment portion was in NISBA's mind was starting to impede the business of the board and making the board meetings very long. And so this gave the various boards of education, the various school boards, the opportunity to control the time frame for public comment. So I'm not saying that's what should be in Port Washington. I'm simply explaining NISBA's thinking and why NISBA outlined the way it outlined. Now, we do not constrain public comment currently, except to limit it to 3 minutes.
We do. In practice right now, we are limiting the first set of public comments to 30 minutes in practice. The second set of comments do not. Also, the thing that we need to include if we're updating this policy is that in practice now at the Board of Education, we answer public comments, right? We respond to all public comments the following meeting. The other thing that I want us to just think about for a moment is that since this policy was updated by NISBA, the Opens Meeting Law has also changed with regards to public participation in the sense that if we were to allow for remote participation, right? So if a board member wants to be part of a meeting remote, then we must allow for public participation to have remote. So I'm going to say that there's changes. We kind of started this, we updated it in 2020. I think the immediate changes that we should be updating is the way our practice on our school board has changed. However, I think we also, again, have to have a conversation on whether or not, and I guess Dr. Shields, I would ask that maybe you speak with our attorneys to see what resolution we would need to put together for the board with regards to the changes in the open meeting law, and how that resolution would have to be incorporated in our public participation at board meetings, right, Deb? Like, so process-wise. So I think we could start. It feels like again, this might be something that is gonna not be a quick, because again, process-wise, the Board of Education hasn't decided publicly on whether or not we are going to go ahead and put together a resolution, and whether or not we are going to allow public participation remotely for a board member, and therefore a community member. So there's a lot of steps that, this policy is going to have to include, that the board first needs to make a decision on, which we didn't really discuss publicly. Does that make sense?
Yes, so thank you for that. We have never codified in policy, because you said it's practice. We have never codified in policy that we allow for 3 minutes at the mic, that people have to sign up. We've made it a practice, but NISPA has made it policy. So the question is, because we've never had it in policy, do we want to codify our practice the way NISPA has? Because the other thing NISPA has done is that they have distinguished the 30-minute periods. They've said that the first 30 minutes is set aside with priority given to comments on items on the meeting's agenda. We have never done that. We've said just come up to the podium, say what you want to say for 3 minutes, and that's it. We've never said it can only be related to items on the meeting's agenda. And then our second set of community comments can also be related to whatever anybody wants to say. We discussed whether we should limit it in practice, but we haven't. We haven't limited it. And NISPA is saying a second 30-minute or whatever time period is set aside for public comment on matters pertaining to the district that are not on the agenda. So the first question is whether we want to codify our practice into the policy. And then the second question is, do we want to bifurcate the purposes of the two separate public comment periods? Do we want the first public comment period to be only as pertains to items on the agenda before the board does its business? And then the second set is basically a free-for-all. So first question is, do we want to put into policy that we are specifying 30-minute or however many periods, or do we want to leave that in practice? And if we're leaving it to practice, do we want to say something about that in the policy? That the length of the time will be based on the practice of the board during any given year. And the content of the comment is based upon the practice of the board at any given year, as we're currently doing. Does that make sense, Dr. Block?
Yes. So I'll answer my recommendation for both. Number one, I think part of the job of the committee is to create policies. And if we're doing something in practice, I think it makes sense to codify it. That said, I want to give us some flexibility. So I think we can say a 3-minute time limit, but I think we have to, something like generally a 3-minute time limit, but giving discretion to the board president to basically overrule it if things get unruly or anything like that, right? I don't want it to be an absolute. I want it to provide some discretion there for the board president to maintain order in the meeting. And then for the first period and the second period, I don't feel comfortable limiting it. I feel like a lot for agenda and non-agenda, because I think that a lot of people come in to the meeting with kids and stuff like that, and they don't want to have to stay till the very end of the meeting. They want to make their public comment that they came for and move on. So I think we should just make it flexible.
Okay, so it does say at the end of that paragraph, it says these periods may be extended by a majority vote of the board. And that's about extending the time as opposed to controlling decorum. Elsewhere in the policy, I do believe it talks about the president controlling the decorum.
Yes, I don't think we need to mention it twice. It is further down, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so your recommendation would be to then have this policy read, let's see, beginning with the sentence to allow members of the public to address the board A period not to exceed 30 minutes will be set aside during the first part of each board meeting for public comment, period. A second 30-minute time period will be set aside at the end, so forth and so on, for public comment on matters pertaining to the district, period. These periods may be extended by a majority vote of the board. Dr. Black, that's what I'm hearing.
But I think our second section of comments doesn't have a 30-minute limit. Is that
There
right?
isn't, and I would try to say that we should, I know that there was the practice this year, and this is how we're doing it, but I think again, overall, the policy should be general and broad reaching. And it might mean, next year we may decide to limit the pilot. So I think getting too specific limits the board's flexibility in running our meetings, okay? So if you go back to our policy, there is no time limits. There is no actual, first set of comments, second set of comments. You are not required to have sets of comments. Some boards have comments that are only directed towards the discussion item. We ran a meeting this year that had it that way too. So I would suggest that we try to stay as broad as possible, and really just maybe if we as a committee want to point out that we are, for instance, like I said, answering questions at the following meeting, we could put that. But this was a practice of this particular board's. Next board may decide they don't want to do that. So I don't think we should be and you don't want to keep bringing a policy back to the policy committee every year because a particular board has decided to make changes to the way they're practicing. I think we should so I would rather us look at our policy and see if we need to add any more broad statements in our policy rather than limiting our policy, because what you're suggesting right now is going to limit us. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I understand the overall, like we need to update, but let's not put in time limits, because what if we want to make it 15 minutes at one meeting?
Well,
I don't know.
Is not to exceed 30 minutes.
But what if we do? Like, why can't, our policy was very general, and it made the point. It says the Board of Education encourages public participation at regular and special board meetings. Persons wishing to speak should identify themselves, any organization that they may be representing at the meeting, and the topic that they wish to discuss. Comment should be as brief as possible and relate to school matters. Inappropriate, I think our policy covers what we need, what we do. The only thing that we may have to update is, again, what the open meetings law has changed with regards to public participation, because we may have to allow, if the board agrees, participation via virtual, like via Zoom. So that's the part that we would have to include, which is law. But I don't know why we're creating, I think, obstacles for the Board of Education, future Board of Educations.
I don't know that it's an obstacle, because it allows for the public, it sets a structure, and it sets a structure where the community has an expectation. It gives the board the opportunity at each meeting, much as it gives the board an opportunity each meeting to extend the public comment period upon majority board vote. It allows us to go up to 30 minutes, doesn't have to be 30 minutes. It allows that flexibility. So to me, it allows flexibility in both directions, and it gives the public an understanding of how long they can basically expect the comment period to be. That's just how I'm reading this policy. So I understand your comments. Any comments from the committee on that paragraph? Is the committee's recommendation to keep our first paragraph as it is, where comments should be as brief as possible and relate to school matters? Or do we want somewhat more specific language that NISBA is recommending in this first paragraph? Thoughts from the committee?
I don't have a strong feeling either way. Dr. Ball.
Yeah, I don't have a strong feeling either way either. However, I do want to add to Emily's point, which is that I do think that there is value to us responding to comments. And I do think there is value to us putting, something language like the board will do its best to respond to direct questions in the next board meeting as a new policy. I'm proud of that is a practice that we have engaged in. And I think there is value to it, being codified going forward.
Okay, we can certainly add that. Okay, so then we will leave that part of our current policy as is. I'm just crossing out, sorry. We will disregard the first policy of the NISPA template. Excuse me, the first paragraph. The second paragraph speaks about the process. We have in our current policy, persons wishing to speak should identify themselves, any organization that they may be representing at the meeting, and the topic they wish to discuss. The second paragraph of the policy talks about first come, first served basis, signing up with their name. They may be asked to provide a phone number or so forth and so on. It also says the board president may limit the number of repetitive comments to keep within the time limit for the public comment period, which we don't have in our current policy. So I would suggest adding that to our current policy. Is everybody okay with that? And actually, instead of saying may, I thought has the discretion to. So we read the board president has the discretion to limit the number of repetitive comments to keep within, well, there's no time limit, right?
Just end it. It has the discretion to
Limit
just
the
end it at the number of repetitive comments.
Okay. You like that, Emily?
Well, I think Adam Block likes it more than I like it.
Okay. So,
I think that's who really likes it.
okay, so we will find a place for that sentence to live on our current policy. And then again, this is, presentation should be as brief as possible. Speakers may comment, blah, blah, blah. So that also is really a practice issue that we have done. So we will disregard the third paragraph. I'm not dictating, I'm just speaking out loud. So if anybody disagrees, stop me. Then on page 3, I do think this part is important. The board will not permit in public session discussion, the board will not permit in public session discussion involving individual district personnel or students. I think that sentence should go into the second paragraph of our current policy before the sentence. It says concerns with regards to specific personnel cannot be discussed in public, and community residents are required to follow the proper chain of command. I think that this sentence from the template should lead off in front of the sentence that's in our current policy. And that we then say concerns with regard to specific personnel should be addressed through the proper chain of command or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think that sentence is actually the same sentence as ours, but the point is you're not talking about individuals in public. So I think with our sentence too that said, no, what did it say? Inappropriate concerns with regards to specific personnel cannot be discussed in public. I think it's the same as what this other sentence is. So whichever one I think the committee is better. I think it's making the same point. No individual stories, right? Which we've always put in.
Right. So I will help Javi massage that in. And then, and also our policy 1400 now has a different name. It's now called Chain of Command for Public Complaints. So we will synthesize that. We'll work to synthesize that since we've now just addressed that in public. Okay, the next sentence. All speakers and observers are to conduct themselves in a civil manner. Obscene language, defamatory statements, threats of violence, statements advocating racial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would also add disorderly conduct or other forms of prejudice will not be tolerated. I think that we should add that into our policy.
Can we add bullying? I mean, that was the thing that we saw occur, and Dr. Hines did a great job of addressing it at the meeting, but I want to make sure that our particular students, but also, any members of the community feel comfortable voicing their opinions.
So bullying, heckling, is that bullying?
I
that
think bullying
disorderly
is
conduct?
comprehensive enough that it,
Actually, there's
gets to the
another
point.
whole paragraph on the other page, the next page. I don't understand why they're separated, but there's an entire paragraph that describes all of that. Kind of halfway down, all individuals at board meetings are expected to abide by the rules of public conduct on school property as set forth in the district's code of conduct. And then it goes into, they will not shout, they will not interrupt, they will not block free movement of others. So I don't know why it's separated out that way, but.
Okay, so let's move that paragraph from page 4 and make it part of this paragraph. And this paragraph, meaning the paragraph that begins all speakers and observers, and we'll mesh it together and we'll see what it looks like in one place, because this is very dense with all of the shading on it. And then we can see what that looks like. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. The next paragraph says, persons making presentations at a board meeting will address remarks to the president. Board members and the superintendent have the privilege of asking questions of any person. I'm skipping through. Again,
I don't think we need that. I don't think we need that. I think that's, that's not part of public participation the way we're working. I mean, the way our discussions are done, when there's a presentation, we do have a discussion. So I don't think that flows here with what we're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think the way you pointed it out originally is that NYSBA updated this policy really because there were issues at other board meetings, and right. So I think it's important that we just keep that in mind.
Okay, at the end of this sentence, at the end of toward the middle, it says, commenters should not expect to engage in discussion with the board. However, the board may correct comments that are not accurate and may refer to an existing policy when it answers a question.
So maybe that's where you put in the line that Anna Block just pointed out,
Yes.
also, right? Is that
Yes.
commenters should expect a response, a direct question will be answered at the following board meeting.
Yes.
And that's it. Commenters should not expect a response at that meeting. However, however you word it, right?
Yes.
That will be answering the following meeting.
Yes, I was going to suggest.
Maybe that's your line.
But have it begin, commenters should not expect to engage in discussion with the board.
Right.
But the following sentence, however, the board may correct comments that are not accurate.
We have not been doing that, and I do not believe
doing that.
I don't think we should ever get into that, because that becomes, but you can then say, however, the board will answer questions, at the next board meeting under old business.
Yes. Okay. I'm just making.
It should be clear that it's questions. The board will address questions, right? Because we haven't been, right? That has been the practice. We haven't been actually commenting on comments, but on questions.
Okay, good point. Good distinction. The next paragraph, questions and comments from the public concerning matters not on the agenda. We don't ever deal with that, so we can strike that paragraph. Is that agreed? I see heads shaking in agreement. Okay. Then on the final page, president will be responsible for the orderly conduct of the meeting and will rule on such matters as a time allowed for public discussion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've just struck out all of the other paragraphs to which this refers. And I think this is redundant in terms of the president will be responsible for the orderly conduct of the meeting, because that's one of the president's responsibility. I believe that's one of the enumerated responsibilities. Or we can simply say the president will be responsible for the orderly conduct of the meeting, period. And just have that in there. Of course you like that. Okay. The president will remind speakers whose presentations are inconsistent with this policy of the rules for public comment. For speakers who continue to violate this policy, the president may discontinue the presentation or call for a brief recess of the meeting. The president may order the removal of speakers from the speaker's area or from the meeting in general, or may close the public comment period. I actually think this should be in policy. I think we need to give the community notice. Hopefully this doesn't happen in Port Washington, but I think it gives the community notice, and it kind of flows with the sentence that says the president will be responsible for the orderly conduct of the meeting. So that's my suggestion. We incorporate that. Again, bring this back to committee to read it synthesized, see how it flows. I think the public deserves to know that what the consequences are. Like, they know what they're not supposed to do, but what happens if they do it?
So can I just point out that it's at the time, it's 10:57, and I think we have an 11 o'clock and you still have some more policies. But I think you're right, Deb, that the way you've kind of come up with suggestions on this policy and bringing it back to committee sounds like it's the right way to go, and a good start.
So there's one paragraph remaining that we haven't reviewed, and it's for members of the public who are unwilling or unable to speak. And then we can take out, including when these periods are closed, they may submit comments to the board in writing.
We have not done that either, right?
Right, we've never closed it, but if they're unwilling or unable, it's to let them know. When we have it now, some community members know that, we come out of a board meeting, we already have public comments. So I think it's good to include that, to let people know that they have other opportunities to address the board. It doesn't have to be only, if they can't come to the meeting, they have another way. So we'll keep that in there.
So we can discuss this further, because there's practice then that you need to put in, because when, if it's a question, we address it at the next meeting. Do we address we have not been addressing questions that are given to us in writing at board meetings, after board meetings, at a public board meeting. So it's really just the Board of Education has that information. We may direct it to an administrator for more action, but as far as it being for public comment, therefore public information and recorded, that hasn't been happening. So I'm just saying, that changes the practice of the board. And I believe that is a conversation that the entire board would have to come up to agree on how we handle that. That's all I'm pointing out is, again, that's why I was just kind of saying, let's make it as general as possible. My suggestion would be not to include that. There's not a person in the community who doesn't know that they can reach out to the Board of Education and ask a question.
I don't know if that's true.
I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure.
But
I stand on that. I'm pretty sure.
I don't agree with that either.
Okay.
Erring on the side of caution, assuming there is somebody out there who doesn't know, they would first have to know to read the policy, right? So that's also an issue in and of itself. But I personally would prefer to leave it in there, maybe clarify that emails sent to the board will not necessarily be responded to in public. They don't become part of the official record and may not be responded to in public unless requested by email. Unless the email says, please make this part of the public comment.
But remember something, how does that work? Okay, again, we don't have to get into the details of this, but put it in, we'll discuss, because there's the hows. You can.
Yes, I understand.
Right? Okay.
All right. Okay. So, and then I'm sorry, just making my notes. Okay, and so at the bottom, the cross references, we just need to change the names of the policy 1400 to our title, and the number for our code of conduct is 5144.1. And also I would add policy 2310, which refers to our regular meeting policy. And we'll bring this back, bring this beast back, but I'm glad we got through it. Any other comments from the committee? I guess we can just we can skip over the gender neutral because that's going to be a discussion. I just wanted to get code of conduct on for a status update, and then we can go to community comments. Just because we're supposed to review the code of conduct annually, and I just want there to be a record of the fact that we keep having it on our radar, and just let the community know what the status is briefly, Dr. Shields.
Wait, I'm sorry, can I just add something with regards to code of conduct? So we did have a discussion about code of conduct, and I would like to make a proposal, right? So I'm going back to Board of Education meeting where there was a presentation by the NYU subcommittee that discussed, right? Because in the past, we've talked about code of conduct here and about waiting for NYU. And from what I understand, there is going to be now a committee, or a suggestion was made that there be a committee that now looks at code of conduct and makes updates to code of conduct. And I know that at our meeting, the board asked, where is our involvement and the policy committee's involvement? So I would like to make a recommendation, and I'm recommending this, I guess, to Dr. Shields and Dr. Hines, that, and the committee actually, that we create an ad hoc committee that does have board members as well as, I think, members of the NYU subcommittee that would be looking on this to work on code of conduct. And then from that, they work on it for as long as it takes that to work on, because we do know the code of conduct is going to take a while. And then we bring it back to the process. But an ad hoc committee, which is a policy that we have, is one that just gets put together for a particular reason and then disbands after that particular reason has been accomplished, or that goal has been accomplished. So that's how I think. And I think we can ask Dr. Shields and Dr. Hines to just start forming that ad hoc committee, and we can take it from there. But, that's my suggestion, because there is more to this committee than just looking at the code of conduct.
Yeah, so Dr. Shields, did you want to give the committee a status update? I think Ms. Bays covered a lot of it, but I just wanted to have it on the record that the board is aware of its obligation by law to annually review, and that the committee is aware of the requirement to annually review, but that our annual review has been delayed because of our work with NYU Metro, and that we have a big task ahead of us. But I just wanted you to give the community and the committee a status update, and then we can, however you want to proceed with dealing with this 35-page document is great. So if you could just, if there's anything to add, please feel free. I just wanted to have it from the administration perspective.
Of course. No, I heard exactly what Ms. Bays said, and there is an NYU subcommittee through a category of set of goals that have been established by that recommendation from NYU. It's under the area of multi-tiered systems of support. They'll be looking at the code of conduct. There will be a committee established for that. Dr. Pernick is working on setting up the members of that committee, and that committee will focus on reviewing the code of conduct and making recommendations to this committee for changes on the code of conduct. And those recommendations will be forthcoming during the next school year. And the makeup of that committee, I think, to your point, Ms. Bays, can be discussed further as to who's on that committee. Maybe there's board members on that committee, or maybe the committee just makes recommendations to this committee. But we can certainly discuss, the members of that committee as we set it up.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to say that I believe there should be board members on that committee, and so that we can eliminate, and I would suggest that they are members from the policy committee. So again, going forward, after the board has created its new policy committee for next year, because I think it'll save us some time and some, we're all make sure that we're all on the same page at the same time. So that's my suggestion. And just saying it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I've been obsessed with having this policy updated for the better part of, since it was actually adopted many years ago. And I'm glad to hear that we're finally moving along with that. But I felt an obligation as policy chair to let the community know that we have not forgotten about this policy, and it is definitely in the works. Ms. Melkonian?
How does this meet our obligation to review code of conduct annually?
That's an interesting question. I know I asked to have Mr. Miller ask that question. I think the last time we met, I asked if we could ask Mr. Miller, but I can't answer it legally. But I'm thinking that just having a good faith effort, I mean, obviously we know it needs to be changed. So simply reviewing it and reading it and say, okay, well, we know it needs to be changed, but we can't make any changes right now because we're not equipped to make those changes based upon what an external review has said, I would hope would satisfy the obligation, but perhaps we go back to Mr. Miller and ask him. Because we can't change it just for change's sake, right? We can't, to me, having it on the agenda and in earnest saying we are aware that we have this obligation, we are aware it has to be reviewed, but to review it now and not being able to make changes to me is an empty gesture. Just, it's procedure for the sake of procedure without changing substance. But so that's why I keep bringing it on the agenda today.
I'm just trying to protect the district.
Understood completely. Understood.
Meeting our obligations.
Yes, let's double check with
Not
Mr.
looking to make trouble.
No, of course I understand. So we'll check with Mr. Miller. Okay, so let's go to community comments. Anybody want to speak? If you could raise your hand, I will unmute you. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, well, with
Good.
that,
I want to make a community comment
oh, sorry.
on behalf of 3 small community members. So I'm going to read this. This is from, well, I guess I'll identify them. They are Elise Block, Brandon Block, and Jordan Block, and they want to speak on the policy related to homework. And it says, to the policy committee, I think the homework policy is a bad idea. Most children have a lot of activities after school. Also, some teachers assign homework on Chromebooks or iPads, which is a lot of screen time because kids are on electronics during school and at home. Finally, this can affect students' learning because kids might rush their homework in order to get to their activity on time. This means they might get a bunch of answers wrong that they might have gotten right if they had time. In conclusion, I think we should not have homework policy and most people would be happier.
I love your kids.
Dr. Block, do they know who was at the person who was screaming for homework policy?
Oh, they know.
I'm coming
they
to your
know,
house.
and I specifically said, try not to do something that derails my attempts at making and making homework policy. And I think they were pretty convincing. So
I love your kids. I'm coming over.
I love, and the point about screen time is phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Well, I wanted to give them their fair shake. So
phenomenal. Well, Dr. Hines, you can now incorporate something
Oh man,
right? You have your
that
first
is great.
regulation. Screen time shall not exceed X amount of time.
Yeah, no, it's true. And listen, in all seriousness, I appreciate you sharing that with all of us. I think that their voices and other voices should be heard from our kids. So thank you for that. That was very illuminating.
Yes, and you can play this back for them to let them know how much they were appreciated.
I think they will enjoy that.
That's lovely. That's great. Precious. Okay. I just checked with our participants just to make double sure no hands are up. So with that, we'll conclude the meeting. Our next meeting date is June 15th. And so have a happy, safe Memorial Day weekend. I think the next Board of Ed event is the budget vote and board trustee vote. I don't think there's anything else between now and then. No other committee meetings. So everybody get out the vote at Weber in the all-purpose room from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. 2 propositions, the budget, the proposition to create the capital reserve fund, and 3 individuals for 2 open trustee spots. Okay, so June 15th. See everybody then. Be safe. Thanks.
Thank you.